Perfect. We should be going live. I think it's all working. Good. Okay. Cool.
Sweet. Yep. I see us on Twitch.
Yay.
Awesome.
All right. Perfect. Oh. Did we want to talk about the Lorcana tournament info that they put out?
If you want to take it, you can. I think you're the person who probably would know the most.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'll get that all set up while we get to that point then. All right. Cool. All right. Everybody ready? Oh, my arm like disappeared.
Ready?
Yay, green screen.
Nice. Invis arm.
That's great. All right. Oh, welcome to episode 48 of the TCCG Roundtable. We're your hosts, dragonrider, DankestDad, and RonMexico. How's it going?
It's going good. Happy to be here. We are 2 episodes away from the big milestone, which is exciting. We got patch stuff, balance stuff to talk about today, among other things.
Yeah. Well, before we dive into any of that stuff, I am curious what has been going on with both of you in terms of like card games and anything else that you may want to chat about. Ron, let's start with you.
Demons. Yeah, I'm pretty much just playing a whole lot of Demon Hunter right now on Hearthstone ladder. It is kind of maybe excessively overtuned on just really 2 specific cards. Kind of feels like there's an entire deck that is filler based around like 4 cards that are mandatory to run that are so good that you run a Highlander deck of only 1 of copies of cards, except you still run 2 copies of these 2, which are the good ones. So it's been interesting. It's been fun, and they probably need to do something about it since it wasn't addressed in the recent patch, but it has been fun to play. Everything else hasn't felt all that great to me, but as long as you can find something, it works.
All right. Dankest, how about you?
Well, I have not been grasped by the umpire quite as much as Ron has, but I've been enjoying Hearthstone, been playing a little bit, got my rank back up from an unmentionable number to one that's a little closer to where I usually am, and maybe in April I can get back to form. For now, though, been enjoying the physical games. Got another win in my local Star Wars Unlimited draft on Tuesday, and I have my Universe local qualifiers this weekend. And yeah, at least those games, I've been having an awesome time.
Awesome. Well, good luck this weekend. We look forward to hearing how that goes. It's exciting to hear, at least I think it's really exciting to hear that you've won twice in a row with those the draft. I feel like I enjoy draft in physical games usually, but I don't feel like I'm the greatest at draft. It's like it's fun, but I'm usually not the greatest. So I may have to hit you up a little bit on some tips on how to get better at that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's my favorite way to play too. And, after all this time, I'd hope that I'm at least decent at it because, boy, I have spent a lot of hours playing draft across a lot of games. And
new article idea incoming?
Could be. Maybe a new book, but you never know.
There you go.
That is something I could see you going very, very in depth into. Well, let's see. For me, I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone. Getting very excited for some more like events and tournament things that have kind of been announced or that we're still looking forward to, like Star Wars stuff. I just am getting very excited. I also am finally, I feel like I've kind of said this and like I've intended on doing it, but I'm actually doing things to actually work towards casting other games besides Hearthstone. I know Dankest and I did like a kind of pseudo, just like practice casting, something that we found on YouTube for Star Wars. So, you know, we're gonna keep working on that, and yeah, I think we've got something, and I'm excited, and I hope that we can really like take that off and, you know, take it off the ground and get something going with it. But I love casting, and I'm like, let's go, more games.
Yeah, I'm excited for when we get that chance, because even still, I just want to see some tournaments. I want to see some good people play some cards, and maybe they'll even be drafting. You never know.
Maybe so. Hey, I mean, doesn't Magic do that for like their big tournaments? They have like 2-3 different formats that they play.
Yeah, so the Swiss is typically has in the past been multi-format for Pro Tours and Grand Prix, and it's really cool.
Yeah, so maybe we'll see other games do that. We'll see, because some of the other games we have seen some kind of interesting stuff coming out. So we'll talk about that. But I guess we'll start by getting into any news. The first thing, I know last week we mentioned that PAX East had been happening over last weekend. Did either of you catch any news or anything like big that might have come out of PAX East for any card games? I don't feel like I saw anything specific myself.
I heard nothing, but I'm really not plugged into that at all, so I didn't expect to hear anything.
Well, I saw a few spoilers for Magic's newest set, Outlaws at Thunder Junction, and you know that'll be on us in just 3 weeks, April 19th. So for release, and I guess only 2 weeks till pre-release, because oh boy, like we said before, spoiler season never ends. There is always something new.
True. All right. Well, what do we have for Hearthstone?
For Hearthstone, we did have a patch that just came out yesterday, at least at the time of recording, which was the 28th, Thursday the 28th. And there was a lot that happened for Paladin. Paladin was dominating across the ladder, and they got hit very hard. A 1-mana nerf on one of their better minions that benefited a lot from, you know, the hand buff strategies. A pretty large, I think maybe bigger than anticipated type of impact from their lifesteal aura. The deputization aura has dropped from +3 attack to +1 attack for its persistent effect. And the biggest offender that everyone was complaining about, how could you give Paladin Wind Fury when they also have hand buff strategies and you return charged minions to the game like Deckhand and Leroy? Well, it doesn't give Wind Fury anymore. The Shroomskavate got decreased by 1 mana, but they took away the Wind Fury effect for the discount of that 1 mana, which Paladin and Shaman very much don't want to see. Shaman probably wasn't running that card anyway, to be fair. But yeah, that is now gone. Hunter got a small, probably mostly irrelevant nerf, where the worms that they get are now not as strong. There was a big change with Nature Shaman to reduce its lethality. Now, one of its cards that can discover a damage spell can no longer discover that damage spell. It's been replaced with a board clear card. Warrior got slowed down a little bit with one of their board clears becoming more expensive, and their super late game win condition card now almost surely to be completely irrelevant in my eyes, but instead of 8 mana, it's 9 mana. So that's funny, I guess. And then the Ziliax that was ever present got a little bit more expensive on one of its modules, the one that made it everywhere because it was a discount. So now it can't discount quite as much. Lastly, there were some buffs that I think are going to maybe fly completely under the radar. The legendary card for Druid, Aviana, got a 1-mana discount, and a spell for Mage got a 1-mana discount, and will likely still not see play, but hey, at least they're better than they were. So some interesting changes. Demon Hunter clearly is the biggest beneficiary from all this, dodging a nerf on a clear major power outlier that people are already starting to complain about. So we'll see if it maybe gets hotfixed, or if we might not see any changes for the next couple weeks, which is typical of the balance team, where they kind of have this cadence of balance patches. And it seems like maybe they could have done something different, but they didn't have enough information, and the next balance window's in like 2 weeks. So it was either now or never kind of thing. But we can talk about that more in the main topic.
Yeah. Well, you definitely will dive into that. I'm just going to hit a couple of points real quick here, and then hand it over to Dankest for another couple points. We mentioned this last week. Flesh and Blood had the the Mistveil set announced, which will be launching on May 31st, and will be the first set to launch in Japanese, along with the other handful of languages. And then Disney Lorcana also had announced a whole bunch of new stuff that's kind of coming this year, including their 4th set with Ursula's Return that will also be coming out towards the later half of May, and some other like individual stuff that they're selling, including the new cooperative game, Illumineer's Quest. I did want to also say, I think I mentioned this last week, that for me, it was like, okay, Illumineer's Quest, Deep Trouble is the name of this one. And then I'm like, that probably means Illumineer's Quest is like an ongoing thing, right? And then they'll just have more and more, and they'll just change the like second part of the name. And shout out to the crew over at Citizens of Lorcana, because I was listening to their latest episode, and they also had that same thought. So will be kind of interesting to see what other products, what other like cooperative games, or even just the success of this one brings for Lorcana.
Yeah. And keeping going with other games, Magic at PAX, as we alluded to, they've been starting to spoil their Outlaws of Thunder Junction cards. So really flavorful set. You have Outlaws, you have committing crimes, and lots of neat mechanics that I think really are meant to capture that Western flavor. And the official release will be April 19th, with pre-release presuming being on the 12th, the week before. Otherwise, another quick note, Legends of Runeterra also is in a patch week this week, with patch 5.3 coming out. Most of these changes are for the single player, but if you are still playing the rank queues, they will be up for another month as the new set comes out and will continue persisting. So ranked is not off the table yet. And I think that covers it for the rest of our news.
Sweet. So moving on then to competitive and organized play. We don't have any new information on Pokemon, but just to repeat what we've stated in some of the previous episodes, that the standard format is rotating on April 5th for in-person events. It's already rotated as of March 22nd, so about a week ago, for TCG Live. So cards with the E regulation mark no longer legal for play in the 2024 standard format. Cards with F, G, H regulation marks will be legal to use, as well as any future regulation marks. And then for Flesh and Blood, we have the Pro Tour Los Angeles happening this weekend. World premiere of, or was that last weekend, or was it this week? It's this weekend, right?
That was last weekend.
It was last weekend. Okay.
Yeah.
My bad. I thought I was like, wait a minute, I might have said that already. So yeah, Flesh and Blood happened. So that there's that. Go check it out if you want an update, because I don't have an update for you. And I'll turn it over to Dankest for Lorcana.
Oh, I'll turn it over to Dawn. Dawn is our resident Lorcana expert here, so I trust her more than me.
Fair enough. Okay, Yes. So we actually did get some new information about Disney Lorcana competitive stuff. Last week we had mentioned that they kind of were planning on rolling out some of these events, and we didn't really know what information that included. They said, like, hey, we have this Disney Lorcana Challenge, which is what they're calling their competitive circuit. And that was kind of all we knew when we recorded. But of course, as it tends to happen sometimes, either while we were recording or right after we recorded is when they released that information.
Love it.
Yeah, I don't know why. It seems like it never fails. It's like, awesome. All right. But yeah, they did release a bunch of information here. They are having tournaments in North America and then tournaments all across Europe as well. What their plan is for these is to have a handful of these challenges, again, both in the kind of North America region and Europe. And it seems like they want to keep them consistent. So the format that they are planning for these is 9 rounds of Swiss on Saturday of the event. They'll be 2-day events, 9 rounds of Swiss. And these Swiss rounds will be 2 games. Not a best of 3, not a best of anything, just straight 2 games. No matter who wins or loses, it's 2 games. And then at the end of that day 1, after the 9 Swiss rounds, it will cut to a top 32. And then Sunday, the second day of those events, will be a single elimination top 32. And those will be played in best of 3 rounds. Now, the kind of interesting thing, I don't really think we've seen this in a game before, is that first day of rounds where it's just 2 games, essentially for each win, you will get a point. And if you win both of the games, you will get an extra point for winning the whole thing. So if you go 1-1, you each get 1 point. If you go 2-0 and win both games, you get 3 points total for that round of Swiss. And then that's how they'll determine like points and stuff. It's kind of interesting. Like, I think I posted this when it first came out in our Discord. It was like, I don't hate it. Like, I don't really know how I feel about it yet. But I do think that it's really kind of interesting and does a lot of things. I think especially because of the kind of audience that Disney Lorcana is targeting. I think this really kind of enables more people to feel like they can at least play. And like, hey, even if they're losing, maybe they win a game here or there and they can still be like, hey, cool, I got points, and like maybe earn a pack or earn a special card or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And again, I kind of shouted out Citizens of Lorcana earlier. They talked more in depth about this as well. And they were bringing up that, like, I think for the more kind of, I'll say like casual competitive people, not like the real hardcore people that are like, I'm here to win every single round and I'm here to make it to the top. The people who are like, yeah, cool. I can travel to this one event and let's see how I do. Or maybe they get to go to 2. Going off of that point system, it might give them a chance to say, okay, cool. Like last time I went to a tournament, I won 3 games over the rounds or something. I got 3 points. This time, maybe I'll try for like 4 or 5 points. And it kind of actually gives them a judge of how they might be progressing in tournaments or getting a little bit better. And it's not like they're just going to show up and then be like, okay, cool. Like I lost the first 2 rounds. I'm going to drop out now. And then it messes up a bunch of, point tiebreakers and stuff. So it's a really interesting system. I am very curious to see how it will actually play out and how people like it once those events start. They did announce the first, I believe, 2 for both Americas and Europe. And then the dates for all of the other ones. But for the US, the first one is May 25th and 26th in Atlanta, Georgia. And then the second one is June 8th and 9th in Chicago, Illinois. And they did, I guess, have an issue with immediate selling out of registration tickets for this first event, because they also not only announced it, but then they're like, okay, cool. Like in a couple days, we're doing the initial opening of registration for that first tournament in Atlanta at the end of May. And I guess they had it capped at 512 players. And Shout out to our boy Itachi in AFG. He let us know. Literally sold out in 20 seconds. So, yeah.
Nuts.
Very, very high demand. Very high demand. So they have already now put out kind of a statement saying, okay, we have like stopped. We're not going to do registration for that second event until we kind of figure out what's going on in terms of expanding the amount of players that can play and what we want to do with this. I don't necessarily think they expected the the potential registration to be multiple thousands of players, but yeah, there it is. So we'll see what they decide to do with how many registrants they will allow and what they're going to do with opening that back up. But I was not really surprised. I mean, I guess I was surprised that it sold out in 20 seconds, but I was not surprised that it like sold out so fast. I was
Certainly
expecting
one of those good
like
problems for them to have.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed. I was kind of expecting like it'll sell out like the first day, but also I didn't know how many, like players they were going to let in. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, 20 seconds is absolutely wild. Like, oh my God.
That's like Pokemon numbers. That is very impressive.
Yeah. Which, again, good problem to have. So, yeah, we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that, and we'll keep everyone up to date. I believe there's also some, like, I think they said somewhere in here probably the prizes. Oh, yeah. So there's, like, participation cards. There's no cash prizes, but there's different prize cards depending on if you just participated or if you hit certain levels, top 64, top 32, 16, 8, and top 4. So, if people are looking for those like exclusive cards, then maybe they're signing up for that. But I think the overall feeling is that people still want to go to these events. It sounds like even though it's a 2-day thing, there's like this main event, and they're kind of following a lot of the other card games that are doing these multi-day events where they have the main event, they're going to have side events, they're going to have like other things going on. You can absolutely still go, even if you aren't, even if you don't have like a registration ticket to compete in the main event. So they're going to be big events regardless. Again, I know like we just mentioned a little bit ago, right? Magic has been doing this for like pro tours. I think Flesh and Blood has been doing this. Pokemon does this, where there's like, it's a whole thing, right? It's essentially its own convention. So I would not be surprised to see these be very, very popular. So that's pretty exciting. And they also did release the full comprehensive rules for Lorcana as well, kind of following the tournament announcements. So we don't have to dig into that, but don't use contractions. That's what I'm going to say. I hate it. Don't do it.
At least don't be ambiguous. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, especially for games that are like, there's worldwide players. Don't use contractions. No. Lay it out. Okay. Anyways, I digress. So yes, that is what's been going on for Lorcana, because that was like really, really big news. People have been waiting a long time for the competitive stuff. So that's what we have there. And on the other side, we're still waiting for those kind of more official announcements for Star Wars Unlimited. So. All right. I'm going to kick it over to Dankest for our roundtable topic and see what is it that we're going to talk about today, and how do you want to go about this conversation?
Well, I think we can keep it pretty open, but as we mentioned, it is patch week, Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra, but not every card game can patch. They're not all digital, and it's much more difficult for a physical game like, say, Universes, Soulforge Fusion, One Piece, or Flesh and Blood to make changes. And I would say even more difficult for a game that is hybrid like Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, or Yu-Gi-Oh! To manage both physical and digital cards. and how to provide a good experience to both sets of players. So, kind of maybe using Hearthstone as our jumping off point, just because that's where most of our experience lies. I think that talking about the ways that different games manage either balance changes, erratas, bannings, a limited or restricted list, and however many other ways you can approach, correcting design mistakes or issues in their games.
Yeah, a lot to dive into there. As always, of course, I'll dive into like the Hearthstone side of things, and they have changed up their philosophy a good bit over the years. There was a time when Hearthstone would try to let the meta settle as much as possible and was very afraid to adjust cards, and it led to some dark times that people might remember from way back if you were early into Hearthstone, where there was a broken thing that was completely dominant for like multiple months just without any changes at all. And that philosophy has shifted dramatically in recent years to where this is the brand new expansion for Hearthstone came out on Tuesday the 19th, I believe. And here we are Friday the 29th, and we've already had a balance patch that went live on the 28th. So, I mean, we got, hey, here's a brand new meta with all of these cards, 140, 150, whatever it is, I don't remember. And figured out with this new meta, we'll let things develop as they are. And what's that? There's some issues. Okay, we're gonna fix them. Okay, boom. Here's a patch, and the patch came out within barely over a week of everything being out. And there was so much that wasn't solved. There was so much that was still like kind of settling into the format. And it's just really interesting how the balance team has decided to approach this for what I would assume is the foreseeable future, where they kind of have a cadence of balance patches that they follow as sort of like a set guideline. And if this was the window, they were either going to do a balance patch now as in like yesterday the 28th, or they weren't going to do any patches for 3 full weeks. And there was a lot of complaints about certain outliers, especially Paladin, and some Warrior complaints too. So they went ahead and addressed a whole bunch of cards. They even went and buffed some cards that they felt were underperforming. But it happened so fast before things really got to settle down. And that's going to be probably a consistent thing that happens, where we just regularly see changes. I think it's ultimately probably better to have the faster response than the really slow response. I mean, considering like the pros and cons of the two. But man, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of upsetting that it's structured in such a way that it's a now or never thing. Like, it either happens now or we don't do it for 3 weeks. Like, what about in 2 weeks? Why is that not an option? Can that not be an option? Is that just not allowed? Like, and I don't know the internal workings of Blizzard and why it is the way that it is, and the complexities of game developing and all these other things that are way over my head. I don't know what causes it to be this way, but the fact that the cycle is the way that it is creates a lot of weird situations and over nerfs, under nerfs, over buffs, which are super rare, irrelevant buffs sometimes, just not enough data before decisions are being made, and then glaring misses that happen that some people even might have called out in advance of the patch, like, oh, I sure hope they address this too. Oh, they didn't? Oh, shit, kind of thing. And I think that's the meta we might be heading for right now for guaranteed the next 2 weeks, unless they decide to go in and hotfix, which is the Demon Hunter weapon. being a problem. And last time it was like the mini set came out and they did nerfs at the same time and also some buffs, and they're like, hey, we're going to buff Sludge Warlock. Also, by the way, we're printing a new card in the mini set that will make Sludge Warlock really insanely good. Enjoy. And then we had a messed up Sludge Warlock meta for like a couple weeks because, oh yeah, by the way, this is our patch cadence, so don't expect another one because we just did one. Are these changes you don't like? Well, sit tight. We'll change it again in about 2 weeks. Hope you don't like playing a ton of Hearthstone daily. Good luck.
Yeah, I think for me, that's one thing too, that it's like we also not only just had the new expansion, but we also had a whole rotation. So whenever we have, especially the full rotation, I mean, we're about to have that in the Pokemon card game too, right? Like we're seeing this in a couple of card games, and new card releases, is that sometimes things change in terms of the meta, in terms of like what decks or even cards that maybe were good or fine, and now they're like really good because of the changes, or you have some cards that weren't really seeing play that's like, cool, now they're good because other things like have left or rotated out. And I don't know. For me, I'm like, I would like to have seen, I think, a little bit more time before we had changes, just because I do kind of like that. And I think we talked about this before, especially with this expansion, there was something that just felt a little bit different than past like first set expansions, where it felt like people really were still experimenting and trying different stuff, trying new cards. Like deck lists are changing constantly this time around, as I think compared to before, where it seemed like they got settled a little bit faster. But this time, like, I really wanted to see a little bit more wait time before changes.
Yeah, I think honestly, like that they need to have the ability to patch this quickly. We've seen some releases like Ashes of Outland where there has been a problem deck right from the get-go, like Demon Hunter with the new cards that really could not be allowed to stay in its state beyond a few days. But I don't really think that we were there with this expansion yet. And who knows? Maybe they will have some mercy. Maybe they'll decide that the interaction between Umpire's Grasp and Window Shopper is a bug. Maybe. Because I will say, when we reviewed those cards, it did not really match up with most of my Hearthstone experience, at least, that the adjusted cost would be the one that Window Shopper uses rather than base cost.
That is surprising. Also, a temporary discount will carry over discount to the discovered card too. So for instance, Fell Screamer, if you play that card, your next demon costs 2 less. Well, that should only apply to the next demon, right? But it technically gets to apply to the next demon and the next demon in a way because of how Window Shopper works. Also, I randomly generated at one point a Mimiron, and Mimiron gave a discount card, the 0 mana card that you can play that carries over, like, the next card that you play costs 2 less. And I was like, is it going to work this way? Because I feel like with the previous interactions with Shopper, I guess it will. And it did. I got to play the Mimiron 0 mana discount your next card, played Window Shopper, and then that discounted Window Shopper carried over that 2 mana discount on the card I discovered too. So like, yeah, maybe that's an interaction they will consider to be bugged, because currently, I mean, we would have rated it a lot higher if we had anticipated that was going to happen, but it didn't seem intuitive.
Absolutely. But, we'll see where they take it. I do think, though, that it is difficult to take such a qualitative subject like this and try to put an objective stance on it, because I've had metas where I've played them for 3 days and I'm like, enough is enough. This has to go. And maybe it didn't. And this time, I personally feel like we could let it ride, but I really wonder how many other players feel the same way or felt that Paladin or Hunter was just way too much and that it had to go. Because, well, I think that the changes that they made were all for the most part good. I think Awakening Tremors was a little bit unnecessary, maybe, but otherwise, it's not that they've made poor changes. They just have not made enough of them, and that overall the big picture is just not where I think I would like to see it as a player.
I feel like Ron and I have talked about this in the past, but I also think that a big part of this specifically that we're talking about for like Hearthstone also has to do with the fact that it's a digital game and there's so many more players that are playing all these decks, and the decks, like, you have deck codes, right? You have all these streamers, all the like data is available instantly, right? You can just go and be like, oh, okay, cool, like the top deck is this, and then people just will copy the codes, play that deck, and then you start to see a lot of the same decks. And it does feel like it's harder to see the experimentation, the off-meta decks, the people like we have Micaiah in our chat hanging out right now saying like, hey, in top 100 legend found a counter and like I'm 6-1 or 6-0. And we do see that sometimes, but it feels like it's a lot harder to see things like that in these spaces because it's just so much more noticeable to see like, oh, here's the popular stuff, here's what people are having success with, whereas in the physical games, you have to have people to play with for one thing, right? So you might have to travel, you might have to only be able to play at very specific times, like when there are events happening at your local store where people are actually gathering to play. So the amount of games and the like how quickly information is getting out about certain decks or counters or that kind of thing is much, much slower in physical games. So it's also really hard because in these digital games, and especially for all of us who we're probably much more invested, right? Ron was saying like,
True.
Hey, I'm playing this game like every single day. I'm streaming every single day, multiple hours a day. It's so much more difficult to have that level of like intensity or that involvement in physical games. So the rates I think that they probably need to do adjustments in digital games is a lot higher.
Yes. And, I say this to my friends that I play universes with all the time, that we all have a long way to go and a long way to learn, even the top players, because I've been going to my local pretty much every week. We have 2 locals a week, and I've been able to go to both most of the time. I play on Tabletop Simulator with my friends when I get the chance. I still maintain that I've played more Hearthstone in the weekend I've played the most Hearthstone than I have played Universes my entire first year of the game. And if you take the community, more Hearthstone games happen in the first 30 minutes of an expansion than probably happen for an entire universe meta for its timeout. There's just no way, no matter how skilled or strong the players are, that community can mature, test cards, and progress their decks to an optimal level in the way that a large digital community like Hearthstone's can. So it's, even though, it's balancing a card game for both, sets of designers, they're approaching a completely different problem.
Well, like, you probably just don't even need to balance the physical card game for like vast stretches of time because, well, I mean, the data collection alone is like really difficult to even come about and be like, okay, well, how do we even know that this is broken and that isn't, or that there's not some really good counter deck that is available that somebody just hasn't found yet? What if like the designers made like a deck or like a set of cards that they thought, oh, these will work really well together in this deck, and then the players found it and they're using it and they're like, okay, cool, I also designed some counters here. Nobody's playing the counter, nobody's found the counter, why haven't they found the counter? And everyone's complaining about this main deck. They're like, well, aren't they going to find the counter? Like that could be a thing, you know?
Oh yeah. And Micaiah also saying that data lies, and that's true. I think there's more context to it, although I personally disagree with the example of Doc Holliday. I think that's another topic for another day, though. But you need to not just have access to surface level data, but you also need to go deeper. We as the player base can see mulligan win rates, drawn win rates, deck win rates, and not all that much else. We get the tip of the iceberg. And I would imagine that behind the scenes, Blizzard and Team 5 are a bit more sophisticated with how they look at games. But that's just speculation, but I would be willing to bet on that.
To the point of, well, maybe the opposite end of the spectrum, like for nerfs, we've got buffs, and there have been some weird philosophy choices here and there. Like, Doc Holliday is the example of like, hey, this is the power outlier card that is too strong in a deck, so we're going to nerf it. And you can debate either side of that, whether it should or shouldn't have. And then on the flip side, you have cards that like, okay, here's a deck that isn't doing very well, so we're going to take one of its cards and we're going to buff it. And it's sometimes really strange how the card that gets buffed is the one that absolutely did not need a buff. For instance, Trial by Fire in Warrior, which started as a 7-mana card and was really good as a 7-mana card. And it was insane as a 6-mana card, and that's been buffed and hasn't been changed like the rest of Warrior caught up. I guess we're also going to disagree on that too, Dankest, but to me it's strange. Like I think there were other cards that like needed a lot more help, and that one didn't need more help, but they chose the one that didn't need the help to buff, which is just a strange choice to me. That happens frequently, that I've noticed.
Yeah, and well, I don't necessarily agree on the Trial by Fire example. I do agree that it's way too good at 6, but whether it was playable at 7 for another day, they certainly do have the philosophy of concentrating the power budget into a single card. And the example that I think of that maybe you mysteriously forget for some reason is Harpoon Gun. That
mysteriously forget about, yeah.
So, didn't they like buff that and then nerf it? They did a lot of weird stuff with Harpoon Gun. They were all over the place with that card.
Yeah, so Harpoon Gun in Hunter, which was like in the Beast Hunter, which was about a tier 2 deck around the time of the buff in Voyage, had Harpoon Gun as the highest win rate card in the deck by drawn win rate and mulligan win rate. And they buffed that one. They just made it even better so that you definitely won the game you draw Harpoon.
Yeah, that was an absurd choice, because like you don't need to change that card. That card is fine. That card is good. Look how good it is when it's drawn and played and everything. Like, but the rest of the deck is struggling. It probably was fine if it drew that card already, but it's the games that it doesn't. Oh, we're just gonna buff that one. Okay, we're just gonna buff that one. Yeah, it's weird.
And I can see. Go ahead, Don.
I was just gonna say, like, it's kind of interesting too, talking about these specific cards, because I think sometimes it's not just a matter of they're looking at the specific card, but I think they try to look at the deck or like the archetypes as a whole and say like, okay, how can we help this deck or archetype? Maybe they don't always hit like specific cards that, in terms of feels, they don't feel great for one reason or another. But, if we're kind of looking at the comparison of the digital versus physical, the physical games have to take a completely different approach, right? They have to just ban or restrict cards in formats. Whereas at least in these digital games, Ron, I think you and I have talked about this before too, right? They can make these like micro adjustments.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh, okay.
We mentioned like
just...
the devs in a physical game, they can't like run around to everyone's house with a Sharpie.
Like go to your house with a Sharpie and like correct the card.
Yeah. We changed this card. Yeah.
Yeah. So it does allow, I think, a little bit more experimentation from the development side of like, okay, how can we change these cards? And even when we have these patches, right? Like we always speculate, are they going to change the mana? Are they going to change the stats of a card? Like how are they going to change it? Instead of just, okay, it's getting changed. Here's what's going to happen. It's always like, how are they going to change it? So I'm kind of curious, do you guys think that also like really impacts things as well in terms of how do they want to change these specific cards? Because it's not even just looking at like the specific card itself, but how they're going to change things. And do they need to look at the deck as a whole? Do they care about some of those like, hey, this is really good, drawn win rate, whatever, all of those kind of stats. But
yeah,
what do you guys think in terms of looking at it from that angle?
I think that's a really great point, and I think Dankest is going to have a really good answer to it. So I want to jump ahead first because I'm not going to have an in-depth answer to this. I want to focus on a different part of what you mentioned, which is when they do the changes, they give us a little teaser of the cards that are going to be changed, but they don't actually say what's going to happen with these cards. And I think it creates a really interesting community sentiment moment that can succeed or fall flat on its face, like horribly, where, for instance, like in this most recent balance patch, they showed that Odin was getting nerfed. And it's like, oh, okay. I mean, that's like the most toxic thing going on in Warrior right now that takes a super defensive deck and turns all of its defense into offense too, to make it one of the most oppressive things that can possibly exist in the meta for anyone who wants to play an aggressive focused deck. They're actually changing that. That's really interesting. Oh, they're just going to make it one more mana. Oh, that's completely irrelevant. Oh, that's so stupid. Oh, holy shit. Okay. Never mind. And like I called it, I'm like, oh, they're probably just going to change it from 8 to 9, which is the most useless thing of all time in a deck that just wants to make it to the late game and has infinite survivability. But sure, yeah, we'll just buff the mana on it or change the mana, whatever. So like, I don't know. I got on a little tirade because it annoyed the hell out of me. But I just like, that's a fascinating aspect that they do the teaser and then they make you guess, are we going to do a good change or a stupid change? for non-diplomatic lack of better words. I will now turn it over to Dankest to talk about the actual point that Don made, because I'm done with that rant.
Well, just to comment on that guessing aspect, I owe a friend getting myself a 5th cat and naming it Foreman Spike, because I was incorrect that they would not delete the conch from the game in Battlegrounds and that they would just make it copy a non-golden minion. But for the record, I will defend myself and say that I said they should have removed it, and well, that's what they did. So eventually, but I think that Aleko on the team says this a lot, but high confidence change is really sort of that guiding beacon for them when they're trying to make these decisions. And we can harp on how weird it seems when they're buffing the best card, but when the designer takes something that they know is already working and they bring it to that next level to ensure that it's not just going to work, that it's going to excel, they know that they're likely to bring that deck into the fold and actually make a meta impact. Like with a nerf, it's so much easier. You change one thing, there's lots of cascading effects, but if you buff something, nothing really happens unless that thing is buffed enough for it to be in the meta. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of design effort for them to go through each individual card in the archetype, figure out where it falls short, and do mass buffs to raise the power level gradually along all of the cards until the deck fits. When instead they can make a singular higher confidence change, accomplish their goal, and keep designing for future sets or other priorities. And while I do respect that a lot, boy, I wish they had time and resources to do all of those single card changes.
Yeah. I think especially with buffs, it's buffs are either like everyone said, they fly under the radar, or it's like, oh my gosh, how could they buff this thing like they did? Like it's so broken now, right?
Yeah.
Like like there's no in between, I feel like, with buffs. Nerfs I think oftentimes more kind of hit that like, okay, it was nudged a little bit and now it feels like it's a little bit more in line with like a good level. But man, with buffs it's just so hard, and it's like, I don't know. I feel like personally, I teeter back and forth on like the no, like don't do any buffs because it's not going to matter. But also at the same time, like I'm like, just go wild with the buffs. Like just let it all out there. Like let's just have a crazy meta. And then sometimes I'm like, no, I don't know if I actually want them to do that though, because like I remember times they have and I hated it. So I'm like, maybe don't do that.
It's tough, and I don't know if it's just like maybe it's a good portion of that is just a perception thing, where something gets buffed and nobody was playing against it, right? Which is why it needed a buff in the first place, and it turns out it still doesn't matter. So nobody cares, or they're upset that the card was even buffed at all, or they consider it to be like laughable that they buffed it, and like why would you even bother type of thing. So I feel like it's a lot riskier overall, just perception wise, for the balanced team to buff a card in the first place, because that's one of the outcomes, which generally sounds negative, right? People just poke fun at it, like, why would you even do that? That's stupid and irrelevant, right? And then the flip side is now it becomes meta, and people are playing against it, and by the very nature of playing against it, they're going to start losing to it, and then they're going to complain and be like, why did you buff this card? Everything was fine before I had to play against this card. Now I play against this card, and now I'm mad that I'm losing to it. So that's also a negative outcome, where like, okay, this wasn't on someone's radar, and if it's not on the radar, it's a failure because you didn't make it good enough. And if it is on their radar, it's a failure because it's too good and I don't like it. So like buffs are really hard to figure out. And the nerfs, just by their nature, should always be more popular, because there's a sentiment of people being like, I don't like this card. This card keeps beating me. I'm mad that I'm losing to this card over and over. Okay, well, we're going to nerf it. And it might have the same exact type of impact that it would with a buff, right? It either it brings it like more in line, and then it's not as much of a problem, but it's still there. That's the success outcome that people might still complain about. You didn't nerf it hard enough. Or there's it's gone. It's gone forever. It's nuked. Like, it's kind of the same thing as a buff that wasn't good enough, as a nerf that just takes it out of the meta completely. Like, it's like, okay, well, now it's just an irrelevant card. So, but you'll get more positive responses because there's going to be a whole lot of people that are like, good, I hate that card. It's gone forever and I'm happy. So nerfs just in general should have like a higher expected like positive reaction from the community, regardless of like whether you go nerfs or buffs. But it's such a hard job. I just have to say, I do not envy the balance designers. I feel like it would be nearly impossible if I were put in their shoes on how to figure out how to do it. But I'm still going to complain about them all of the time and say they're making bad decisions, because that's the nature of being a player in a card game, right? We don't have to make those tough choices. So instead, we're just like, oh, well, because I'm experiencing the game now, I can clearly see everything that would be perfect for my experience for the game, and you didn't make the game perfect for me, so you're bad at your job, blah, 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 type of thing that the community loves to do so much.
And, you know, if you see the developers online, on Twitter, in some sort of other space, my advice would be to either say nothing or say something nice.
Yes.
Because, you know, there are a lot of people who aren't hearing that advice, who are saying really awful things. And while dunking on the devs once in a while is sort of fun as a community when they're in on the joke, it could imagine how depressing your job would be if strangers on the internet were berating you for every choice that you made, consistently 24/7 across multiple time zones, and you're, just trying to pay the bills, pay your rent, pay your mortgage, and, maybe do the hobby that you also enjoy and make money from it. So,
Yeah, it's rough.
Have some compassion. Maybe Cora will talk about Warrior again on Twitter someday if we can improve our community. But
yeah,
I
can say with a high level of confidence too, what probably makes it even more frustrating for the developers is all of the people who are telling them that they're bad at their jobs, or the complaining about this or that, and why didn't you do this, why didn't you do that. Like, if they were in the same situation, they would unequivocally be worse at doing it than the designer is at doing it. That's why the designer is in that job in almost every case. It's pretty rare to find someone who is like completely wildly unqualified, like the legions of commenters who are wildly unqualified. So like, just imagine, not only do you get to hear this constant criticism, but you've like so much data backing this stuff and like make these changes that are so like thought through, and then someone who has no idea what they're talking about comes in and blasts you, and like 10,000 more of them do the same thing. And you can't, that they're wrong, but you just have to keep hearing all of this garbage. It's brutal.
Yes. My advice for that is start to, I would say, change the terminology, that you use. Instead of, why did they make these choices? It's, I don't like these changes, because then you're not just like, oh, it's the dev's fault. It's like, I don't agree with the changes, or I don't like the changes that, that are happening. There's kind of a big difference in the way that people express that. So yeah, that's a whole interesting, I think we could probably do probably several episodes.
Yeah, we could branch off deeply into that one too, I bet.
Oh yeah. But before we fall off this topic, just really quick, we gotta pay our dues to these other games. So, nerfs are not the only option. So physical games have errata, which is their attempt at a nerf, but physical. You have to pretend to be the Sharpie for the designers. But we also have bans, and I think some of the more interesting systems that are used are Flesh and Blood's Living Legend system and the restricted/ban list in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or restricted, limited, some limited bans. So just to give you a little context for Flesh and Blood, when cards do well in events, particularly the hero cards, they are getting points on the board. And once the cards hit a threshold of competitive success, that card is rotated from the format effectively. It's banned. So there is sort of this kind of cool meta thing where, if you imagine you're getting stomped by this card that you hate, you're going to be hate watching that tournament when it's closing in on that 1,000-point threshold, knowing that it's the last ride for the strategy. And I think that the Flesh and Blood team did a really good job of turning what is usually like a community boogeyman into this uniting factor where everyone can get together and, cheer it out for the one last.
That is pretty hilarious. It's a great move.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really cool system. I definitely have liked that one a lot. And I think, I know you're going to jump into a little more. I just want to hit on one point too, is I think this is another big difference between like digital and especially the physical games, is you mentioned that is counted as the events, right? Like there's no data. You can't really go around and be like, okay, how are people casually playing these physical card games, right? Like you only have the like competitive events really to judge how well cards are doing or not doing, or how often they're being played. But in digital games, you have, everybody playing on ladder, no matter what rank they're at. Like you have all those different players. So yeah, to have to kind of say, okay, well now we're going to change the system just based on like the events, because that's where we see these things. I feel like is such a good move.
Yeah. And, maybe for ladder, they could do something for us in digital games, maybe put out a bounty board for play rate for the top cards in the game. And once they hit the threshold, they get nabbed. We did it with Bran back in Murder at Castle Nathria. We got Bran over 50%. And him and Renathal, I think, are the highest play rate cards we've ever seen in Hearthstone. And I don't think we'll ever see cards with that high play rate again. But
what about the customizable Ziliax? Where's it at? Do you know?
That's
a pretty unique card. It's not even like one card exactly. It is and it isn't.
Let's take a look here. Live look. Oh, well, Ziliax is kind of there. All Ziliax put together for Diamond through Legend is at about 57% inclusion.
Whew.
But like you said, though, it's 28 cards in one.
Yes.
So it's a little bit tougher to quantify.
It's not exactly.
Yeah.
Can you even sort it by like the specific types?
I don't think so. Not within the data we have access to.
Probably because like the deck trackers wouldn't even tell you until the card was played in the first place, right?
Right.
Among other reasons.
Yeah. I think actually the Hearthstone replay does have that. If you look at the deck lists at the very bottom, I think it does show you what the two modules are. But I feel like on the player side, I don't think we'd have the exact like stats relevant to that.
Right.
But they might have those kind of stats of like which modules are being used the most or
maybe internally they do.
Scenes.
Oh, I'm sure.
The reason why they nerfed the ticking module,
that specific module,
the discount one, because they're like, okay, everybody's running this and they're playing free Ziliaxes. We should maybe make it less free.
So yeah, and then we got one more topic, which is Yu-Gi-Oh's list. So if you guys aren't familiar there's no rotation in Yu-Gi-Oh. So every card ever printed in the game at any time is legal all the time, except for cards that are
smart.
Yep.
Yeah. Wild format.
Yes.
Evergreen wild format. Love it.
But there is a banned and restricted list. And while some cards are banned like you would expect, other cards are treated kind of like legendaries in Hearthstone, where you're only allowed to put one of them in your 40 card deck or two of them in some cases instead of the full three, which leads to an interesting dynamic where oftentimes when a card is very powerful, it will not just be banned, it will be restricted to one copy. And that will either limit the prevalence of the strategy or make it so that the combo engine can't extend quite as far and can only get that big power spike from the first copy of the card, which is interesting. Hearthstone with legendaries and their effects does this in a soft way. Like they actually do kind of enforce the same thing on us with what they decide to make legendary and what they don't. But how do you guys feel about that system? What are your thoughts?
Which part? Like not the evergreen always wild part, right?
Not that part. The use of restriction or limited or
just had to clarify because one of them's insane. That would be that. I think it's really interesting as a concept. I don't know how to evaluate it as far as like following it further through, but essentially it would just mean that like if there's a card that becomes powerful enough that's not a legendary, it gets upgraded to a legendary, right? That would
pretty much, yes.
That would be like in practice in Hearthstone how it would work. And I think I would support that idea. Like that sounds kind of great. Like if there's one card that's actually so insanely good running rampant as an epic or rare, common, whatever, just, hey, this card is now a legendary. And like, don't mess with the community, give it to the players for free. So you don't get like an uproar of barrier to entry for free to play players or anything budget wise, where it's like, okay, the game economy dictates that this is now way more expensive. So now I can't play it. You price me out. That's messed up. So there needs to be like some additional consideration taken into effect because it would be a balance driven move. So you'd probably have to just give that card away for free to every player, including new players, or it'd be like a problem for future people who joined. But I also like I feel like it's the concept of promotion and relegation in like Premier League soccer and other things, and I think that would be awesome to actually follow it through its logical conclusion. And if there's a legendary card that really sucks, maybe it gets relegated to an epic, right? And now you can have two of them because it wasn't good enough to be a legendary anyway. So here you can have two copies of it. Maybe that'll make it actually worthwhile, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's a hilarious concept to me too, that a legendary could get relegated and then we have like something that's like an epic or rare or whatever that gets promoted to legendary because it's too damn good. Yeah. I am here for it.
I'm with you. And I know it seems kind of out there, but like I really do hope that they pull that lever someday because I think it could be really interesting.
Now, I am not as familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! So do you know, does like the base set of rules have any sort of restrictions on cards? I know you said like 3 cards you can include in the deck, but are there any other limitations in terms of the deck building and what you can include before those erratas and stuff go out?
40 card minimum. Pretty much.
Okay. So nothing like where Hearthstone says like you can only include 1 legendary, like nothing like that.
Yeah, I think that as it is now, Hearthstone is one of the only games I can think of that has a deck building limitation like that.
Yeah, most of the time, I was going to say because I think the other closest examples I can think of is in games where they only allow you to have 1 in play, right? Like Magic, like you can only have like 1 of the mythics in play at a time. Star Wars, the same thing. The characters, like here I have Admiral Akbar. Oh my gosh, with the green screen you can't see that at all. There you go. The little diamond in front of the name. You can only have 1 of those out in play at a time, right? So is that is that like the same thing in Yu-Gi-Oh, or is that just like they kind of changed just how you function with putting them in your deck?
Just putting them in their deck. So there are some cards themselves that will limit how many of them you can have out at a time. Some cards have soft or hard ones per turns for using their effects that can sort of act like that rule in some cases, but there's no concept of legendary or, you know, unique for a card intrinsic to the base rules. But like, I think that for those other games where you're able to run 3 or 4 copies of a card, it makes sense to have a card with a powerful effect that shouldn't be on the board in multiples, but also you need consistent enough access to it to do your deck's cool thing. And I think that in Hearthstone's past, we've had a lot of legendaries where the card encourages a build-around strategy that is novel and interesting, but is too inconsistent because you only have 1 legendary and not enough ways to tutor it. And maybe those build-arounds could be at Epic, or if it happens again, could be swapped either way, like Ron was kind of saying.
Yeah, and you can promote things further too, right? Certain legendaries are too good. You can promote them to out of the game.
There you go. Yeah. Out of the game. Yeah. To non-existent. Yeah, because I mean, just talking about like balance, the way that those work in different card games also, I'm sure, ties into how they balance those cards when they're creating them, right? Like, you know, if in Hearthstone it's a legendary, well, they might develop it a little bit differently than they would if it were an epic. And in other card games, well, yeah, you can have multiple copies in the deck, but you can only have 1 in play at a time. I mean, I think another example of like maybe how they have kind of changed that would be in Legends of Runeterra, right? The champions, you could have multiple copies of a champion, but if you had 1 in play and 1 in your hand, the 1 in your hand changed. Now, of course, they can do that digitally, not really in physical games, but like just the different way that they kind of change them and create differences is really interesting and kind of like, I guess, pseudo workarounds for balance for those type of things.
Yeah.
By the way, I love the concept of like a competitive in-person physical card game event where you're holding the cards, right? And you have the champion in play and you have one in your hand. So someone from like the sideline runs over to the player and grabs the card out of their hand and gives them a different card, runs back, you know?
Yeah, double face cards, nah, couldn't happen. But yeah, like champions in Runeterra are wild though, because there are so many different cases. Like if you pull one from your deck or resummon one that had died, you can have 2, 3, you can have a full board of one champion. That's possible, but you just can't do it from the hand. And it's definitely a cool mechanic that I know on the competitive side I'll be missing. All right, so I think with that, unless you guys have anything else to add, I think it is my turn to do the outro today.
Sweet.
So, boom. Here we go. Thank you for joining us this week. And if you or someone you know would be interested in joining us, please reach out to us. You can email us at tccgroundtable@protonmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/tccgroundtable. Use our pinned tweet for a link to our Discord, or use the link in the description. Check out the video version at youtube.com/c/dragonrider TCCG. Everywhere you can find audio podcasts. And you also can use our Ink Gaming affiliate to support us directly while getting cool merch like playmats and other card game accessories. And individually, you can find me at twitter.com/daddankest or on youtube.com as DankestDad. Ron, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Ron_HS. And you can find me streaming on Twitch Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern at RonMexico HS.
And Dawn, of course. What about you?
You can find me on Twitter, DonnieDK. That's DAWNIEDK. You can find me on Twitch and YouTube, dragonrider TCCG. And you can find me every week on the Dr. 3HS podcast, talking everything standard Hearthstone.
Awesome. Well, that does it for the outro. So thank you, and we'll see you at the roundtable.